Hello, everyone, and welcome to the channel. We are told Europe is defending peace and democracy, but the political class in Brussels and several capitals now lives off a permanent war narrative that keeps them relevant, funded, and untouchable, while the bill goes to everyone else. That's the core contradiction. Officially, this is about values and security. In practice, it is about careers, budgets, and an elite that quietly understands if the conflict ends, their role shrinks, their mistakes become visible, and a lot of very loud people suddenly have nothing useful to say. By the end of this, you'll see why de-escalation is a threat to them, who actually benefits from endless tension, and who pays for this theater with taxes, prices, and future risks. Start with one simple observation. Every time there is even a hint of potential negotiations, some of the loudest reactions in the West come not from the front line, but from European politicians and institutions whose entire brand is built on standing firm. Here's where the story stops making sense. The people most dependent on the continuation of the conflict present themselves as the guardians of peace. When one American candidate publishes 28 bullet points on how he would finish the war, you can like or hate him. That's not the point. The interesting part is the panic in Brussels and a few European capitals. Suddenly you see who needs the current arrangement to continue, because without it they lose the script, the funding packages, the daily media oxygen. If you work in any public sector in the EU, you see this logic. Once a program, threat, or emergency becomes the justification for a whole ecosystem of positions and committees, ending that emergency becomes dangerous, not for citizens, for the ecosystem. Now reality. No side in this war has reached its strategic goals. Not Russia, not Ukraine, not the European Union, not the United States. The front has stabilized, the casualties are enormous, and the map does not look like anybody's original plan. Officially, this is still framed as a path to victory. In real numbers, it looks much more like a frozen crisis where everyone is trying not to admit that the main goals are out of reach. Micro summary: the war is extremely costly, strategically inconclusive, and politically addictive. There is one historical parallel in this whole story that nobody in Brussels likes to say out loud. We'll get to it in a moment. For now, look at incentives. In Kyiv, the current leadership understands perfectly. A real ceasefire and a real settlement would mean a complete reboot of the political class. War is their mandate. War is the excuse for everything that doesn't work. The day the guns fall silent is the day society starts asking normal questions about corruption, legality, elections, and responsibility. So any peace proposal that doesn't guarantee their personal survival is automatically unacceptable. On the European side, you have governments and an unelected commission that have invested huge political capital in one narrative. We are the moral front line of the free world. The problem is that this narrative covers a lot of internal failures: energy policy disasters, deindustrialization, unresolved migration issues, degraded public services. This is the part no politician wants to explain on TV. If you remember only one thing from this video, let it be this: conflict here is not only a tragedy, it is also a very convenient distraction. Add the United States. For Washington, this conflict is one theater inside a larger competition with China and a global repositioning. Support for Ukraine is filtered through domestic politics and election cycles. Once the mood shifts there, Europe discovers something unpleasant. Its moral rhetoric does not automatically move reality if the main military and financial backer is tired. We've just seen a quiet shift. Some Western voices now acknowledge that a neutral Ukraine, some form of security guarantees for Russia, and a different European security architecture are not insane demands, but part of any realistic settlement. When Moscow said it, it was propaganda. When Washington hints at similar lines, Brussels suddenly looks very small. You see the structural problem here, right? From the point of view of an ordinary European, what does all this mean in practice? First, money. Tens of billions are being allocated, reallocated, and borrowed in the name of security and support. That money does not come from nowhere. It is future taxes, deferred infrastructure, postponed hospital repairs, smaller education budgets. This is where it moves from a Brussels press release to your electricity bill, your VAT, and your municipal services. Second, legitimacy. The more decisions are justified by war and emergency, the less space there is for real democratic debate. If you question the cost, you are suspected of disloyalty. If you ask whether sanctions actually work as planned, you are accused of echoing enemy narratives. At some point, the line between democracy and a polite collective dictatorship becomes very thin. If you live in any EU country, ask yourself honestly, do you feel that major strategic decisions reflect public discussion, or do you mostly see ready-made packages being sold after the fact with moral pressure and fear? Third, internal stability. While elites talk about defending our model, the model itself is cracking. Fragmented societies, parallel urban worlds, zones where the state is strong and zones where it is conveniently weak. Officially, this is all about rule of law. On the street, people see selective enforcement, double standards, and a quiet acceptance of chronic disorder as the price for past mistakes in migration and integration. This is where the spreadsheet quietly turns into social unrest. Now back to the historical parallel. Europe in the 1910s and 1930s also tried to freeze unpleasant realities with half solutions and temporary deals that left core questions unresolved. Security guarantees, borders, spheres of influence, access to resources. The First World War did not solve the problem, it postponed and mutated it. The second one finished the old order in a much more destructive way. The danger now is similar. You have a war where none of the main players has achieved its goals, but all of them are deeply invested in the narrative that they are one step from success. Any compromise that reflects reality looks like defeat at home. So the temptation is to park the conflict in a semi-frozen state and prepare for the next round, while telling citizens that peace is just around the corner. From your country, does this look like responsible strategy or more like improvisation under a very expensive flag? There is also the empire reflex. For centuries, European powers justified expansion and intervention as a civilizing mission. Today, we hear softer words about rules-based order, values, and our responsibility. The pattern is less bloody than in colonial times, but the mentality is recognizable. We know better, we decide who is legitimate, we punish those who disagree, and we are surprised when the rest of the world does not applaud. And this is the number that changes everything: 0. 0 of the main actors are willing to publicly admit that their original war aims are unattainable at a reasonable cost. As long as that number stays at 0, the system is locked. Any real peace initiative will look like a betrayal of sacred slogans, and anyone pushing for strategic realism will be painted as weak or corrupt. This is the real cost of the convenient story we started with. The story that this is simply about good defeating evil and that staying the course will somehow solve deep structural problems in Europe, Ukraine, and the global order. The cold conclusion is simple. Europe's elites have tied their legitimacy to a war they cannot win decisively in a conflict where they are not the main decision makers, on a continent that has already twice demonstrated what happens when unresolved questions are left to fester. If nothing changes in how goals and costs are discussed, we are not moving towards stability. We are moving towards a bigger, more dangerous correction later. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and try to remember, slogans don't power grids. Systems do.